We literally walk through every single unit in the apartment complex, and I start to realize that it's just starting to get worse and worse and worse. What's up, guys? It's James Allen, the out-of-state investor, and I recently, this last July, just went into escrow on a 24-unit apartment complex. Now, I've never been in escrow before on an apartment complex. I typically only purchase deals of 1 to 4 units up until now, but this time I decided to go really big with an opportunity that I saw. And so it's been very time consuming between putting numbers and projections together, between doing the financing and due diligence and all the research that goes into a property of this size. But with that said, it has been a really good learning experience. And so today I thought it'd be fun to share with you my experience on this deal, how I lost thousands of dollars pursuing it, how I ultimately decided to take a pass on it, and also some of the lessons I've learned throughout this process as I'm trying to continue to scale my real estate portfolio. But before I break this down, do me a favor and smash that like button, and also subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want to watch more videos like this. And with that said, let's jump into it. So for the past 4.5 years, I've been buying single families and small multifamily properties, whether it's fix and flips or whether it's rental properties. I've been doing 1 to 4 unit deals up until now. But recently I decided to partner up with a couple of people on a much bigger deal. I've been searching for really a 6 to 20 unit apartment complex. So I've been looking for this type of property since about April of this year, specifically in the city of Knoxville, Tennessee. I've been looking for C-class to B-class areas with value add opportunity, and apparently every investor in the area wants the exact same thing. So it means that there's a lot of competition. Now, to make it even tougher, there's just not a lot of inventory for this particular size of property in the city of Knoxville. If I'm looking for 6 to 20 unit buildings, they just haven't built a lot of those types of properties in the Knoxville area. So that just makes it even more challenging to find what I want. But with that said, I actually saw a 24 unit building get listed in Knoxville, Tennessee, in a neighborhood that I was very familiar with, already invested in. I knew it was an up and coming area. It was built in 1965 and it was going for $1.6 million. So I decided to start analyzing this deal. So there were a few things I really liked about this property. The first thing is, like I mentioned, it was in a neighborhood I've already bought, so I was very familiar with the location. I've already invested there before and I was aware it was a very up and coming area. In addition to that, it had a good unit mix. Half of the units were 2-bedroom units and half of them were 1-bedroom units. So there were 12 2-bedrooms and 12 1-bedroom units. In addition to that, the price per unit was actually below market value. So something like this in the current state of the market would normally go for about $75,000 to $80,000 per unit. And actually there was a property that got listed just a few weeks after for $80.5 thousand per unit, and they were all 1-bedroom units and still needed to be updated inside. So I felt like this was a pretty good bargain at $66,500 roughly per unit. The other thing I really liked about this was the value add opportunity. You see, the rents were below market value, which is probably why the price per unit was so cheap, but I wasn't bothered by the fact that the initial cap rate was low on this property because there was the potential to increase it so much. So I felt like even in as-is condition, I could raise the rents a pretty decent amount, but if I was to reposition it and completely renovate the units in the interior and the exterior, then I could raise the rents pretty significantly. And that's the cool thing with apartment complexes, is that when you actually raise your rents or you lower your expenses, not only are you improving your monthly cash flow, but you also improve the value of the property, because the value of an apartment complex, anything that has 5 or more units, is directly tied to your net operating income. Now with this property, there were currently 7 renovated units of the 24. The other 17 were non-renovated units. Now for the non-renovated units, the 1-bedrooms were currently going for about $430 to $500 a month depending on the unit. And I knew that after I renovated those units, I'd be able to take them all the way up to $750 a month. For the 2-bedroom units, they were going from about $500 to $580 a month in current condition. But I knew that if I renovated those, I could bring them up to about $875 a month. Now even the renovated units which weren't done as well as I planned to do the other units, were also under market rent. They were currently going for $625 a month for the 1-bedroom units. I knew that we could at least get those up to $675 in current condition. And for the 2-bedroom units, they were currently going for $675, which I knew we could get closer to like $775, $800 a month. And when you factor in the exterior renovations and adding washers and dryers and things of that nature, we may even be able to go higher on the already renovated units. So I ran the numbers and I figured out that by the time I'm able to reposition this property, which could take anywhere from 2 to 4 years, I would end up taking our gross rents from $12,885 a month all the way up to $19,500 to almost $21,000 a month, depending on how long the process took us. So this would obviously give us the opportunity to cash flow well, but in addition to that, it would improve the value to probably anywhere from $2.5 to maybe even up to $2.7 million. So I like the location, I like the cash flow potential, and I also like the value add potential, but there were some serious negatives to consider as well. For one, this property was on the older side, which means it's normally a bit higher in maintenance costs on a monthly basis, but in addition to that, the capital cost for this project was going to be a lot of money. I mean, we were talking about $350,000 just to get the property in the first place between down payment and closing costs, and then in addition to that, probably another $350,000 in repairs. So for me, this would be by far the biggest project I've ever done in real estate, and in addition to that, the cash flow up front would not be the greatest because we'd only be doing $2,500 a month in net cash flow, but that's considering that the initial financing was going to be interest-only payments. So once the principal kicked in, if we weren't able to raise rents successfully, we run the risk of going even negative cash flow on this apartment complex. So even though there was some real risk with this project, I felt the upside was so much better than the risk, and I felt that we really had an opportunity to do a BRRRR strategy kind of deal with this apartment complex, be able to get all our money back in our pocket, our initial capital, the repair costs, all that stuff on the refinance, and still have a cash flowing apartment complex on a 24-unit building. So that was enough for me to be excited about pursuing this deal and even potentially putting in an offer. So we decided to move forward and we scheduled an initial walkthrough where they showed us about 3 units, 2 of the renovated ones, 1 of the non-renovated ones. And because I'm out of state, and that's what I do, I invest out of state, I have my broker and my property manager walk those units for me, and they FaceTime me during that, so I was still able to see everything that they were looking at, and they were also able to give me feedback on what they saw as well. So at this point, everything looked good on the exterior and on the interior units that we at least saw, so we decided to move forward with making an offer. Now our broker told us that there were already multiple offers on the property, so we decided to make our offer at full asking price. We also provided them with a pre-approval from a commercial bank so they could see that we were serious about this, and at that point we were just stuck waiting. We ended up waiting about 2 weeks before they finally made a decision, and during that 2 weeks they asked us questions about our real estate investing experience, and they also asked for a proof of funds to know that we were a serious buyer. So we submitted everything they asked for, and we waited the 2 weeks like they said, and at that point we found out there were over 10 offers on this property, with several of them being over the asking price. So they asked for our highest and best, and at this point I felt like I didn't want to go any more than a $1.625 purchase price. So that was kind of where I was at that point. Now I don't know if they liked our experience or financials or what it is, but apparently they kind of wanted to help us win this property. I felt like they kind of liked us as a buyer for this property, and so they kind of hinted that if we wanted to win this property, we'd have to offer $1.65 million. So I was about $25,000 under what they wanted me to get to, and so I felt like at that point, although it was above what I wanted to go to, I felt like for $25,000 more, it's not worth ruining a potential BRRRR strategy deal. Even if we go maybe just short of a BRRRR deal, it's still going to be a good deal overall. So I decided to do it. $1.65 million. I put the offer in. And now we're in escrow, the clock's ticking, and I got 30 days to do my due diligence process. Now, financial due diligence is where I started with this. I got their rent roll, their T24, which is their trailing 24-month financials. I got their signed leases, and I got some other documents as well, just to make sure that everything they initially represented lined up with what the actual facts were. Now, there were a few things that stood out to me immediately. The first thing was the maintenance costs were a lot higher than they initially represented. Initially, they told me $1,000 a month on the pro forma, but in reality on the financial documents, it was actually showing $2,250 to $2,500 a month in maintenance costs, which is more than double what they told me before. And this was interesting because initially I asked in the walkthrough, have you guys upgraded the plumbing? And they said that they had actually upgraded it to copper plumbing, which should result in a much lower maintenance cost. But I'm starting to think at this point, maybe that's not the case. Maybe they haven't updated the plumbing. Either way, we were soon going to know the truth because the inspection was just around the corner. But the other thing that stood out to me is that initially on the pro forma, they said that they were not getting charged for water because they were billing the tenants for it. There's a word for this called RUBS. It stands for Ratio Utility Billing Service. And it just basically means that they were billing the tenant based on the size of their unit for the water. And they were saying they were covering the whole amount. Well, it turns out that they hadn't even started it yet, that it wasn't even until the month of August, which was next month, that they were actually going to start doing that. So that is a problem because there's no proof of concept. We don't know if they're actually going to pay for this. And that makes it trickier when you're trying to get financing and they're looking at your profit and loss statement and whatnot, because all the profit and loss statements show that you're actually having to pay for that out of pocket. So the water accounted for $2,400 a month. And there were a couple problems with this because obviously you're taking the risk of having that expense on your shoulders because there's not even a proof of concept. But in addition to that, even in a best case scenario where everybody's paying, you really shouldn't be counting on 100% coverage for water because in reality, you should only be counting 80 to 85% of the water coverage because you got to account for common areas, right? You can't bill a tenant for common area usage of water. Now, in addition to that, there were 6 tenants that already had year-long leases that had nothing in their contract about paying the water. So I'd have to wait at least another 9 to 12 months to get all of those tenants on board. So now not only can I only do 80 to 85% of the water, best case scenario, I have to take away 6 of those tenants from the first 12 months of ownership. The next thing I did is I called the county tax assessor, and I did this to get an idea of what my property taxes would be after I purchased the property. I always recommend you do that anytime you purchase a property. Now, it was interesting what they told me because they shared with me that there was going to be a county-wide reappraisal of all the properties for taxes. And this is bad news because it means my property value is going to be reflected in my taxes now. My $622 a month was likely to go up to somewhere between $900 to $1,000 a month. So that meant an extra $300 to $400 a month in expenses. So right off the bat, my monthly expenses are a lot higher than I actually initially anticipated between the water bill, between the maintenance costs, and also between the property taxes. Now, the water bill and the maintenance I could actually fix. I can renovate the property, update the plumbing. That's going to bring my maintenance costs down. The water bill, I'm sure over time we can sort that out. But as far as the property taxes, I was kind of screwed on that. That is just what it is. So at this point, I decide to fly out. I go there in person for the inspection. I meet with the inspector and we literally walk through every single unit in the apartment complex. And I start to realize that it's just starting to get worse and worse and worse. Now, the first problem we ran into is all the electrical panels needed to be changed. They were Federal Pacific electrical panels, which if you're not familiar with that, they're notorious for causing fires to properties. So you really want to change it for the safety of the property. But at the same time, because of the way they were wired or something along those lines, it was going to cost even more than a typical panel would be to change. So we were looking along the lines of $40,000 to $50,000 to change all the electrical panels. Next, we checked out the plumbing, and although there was a little section that actually had some copper plumbing, the overwhelming majority was galvanized steel and cast iron sewer lines. So this was a big problem because we were going to replace all the plumbing because there were actually 3 major active leaks at the time when we went to inspect it. So we needed to replace this galvanized steel piping, and that alone, not even addressing the sewer line, was going to cost us an additional $50,000. Now, to make things even worse, and yes, it did get worse, there was black mold. I'm talking about the toxic black mold in multiple of the units. I'm talking about maybe 9 or 10 of the units had toxic black mold. So this was looking really bad bad. We actually found toxic black mold also in many of the crawl spaces. So I decided to get a mold remediation specialist to go out there, check it out, tell me how bad this problem really was and how much it was going to cost likely to fix this problem. And he came back and told me this was a really bad situation, one of the worst he's ever seen, that he was talking about a 6-figure project just to remediate the mold here, and that it could be even worse than his initial estimate depending on what we found behind the walls. At this point, we knew we'd have to fully gut a lot of different units in this property. There was also several units that had very soft subfloor indicating that there was rotted wood, and so there were just so many red flags throughout this property between the electrical, the plumbing, all these long-term water damage you're talking about. So there was some serious issues with this property that made it a lot less attractive than it initially looked. So all of a sudden, the upside of this deal didn't really seem as attractive when you factored in all the downside risks that we were talking about. The cost of capital went significantly higher. The cash flow was even worse than I initially projected. And when you factored all that in, coupled with the fact that I'm doing all this from out of state, it just didn't make any sense anymore. So I decided that I wasn't going to pursue this deal anymore. I decided to pull out. There were just too many red flags to move forward with this. So anyways, there were a few takeaways I wanted to share with you about this experience. The first one is that everything is more expensive when you're dealing with bigger properties. My inspections cost me about $4,000. I would have spent about $30,000 on closing costs, and my earnest money deposit was 20 grand. So everything is elevated, so plan to spend more money on your transaction costs. Number two is it takes a lot longer to navigate a deal of this size than you might realize. So plan on doing at least a 30-day due diligence period. Plan on trying to get up to 60 days to close on the deal, so that way you can have time to work your financing and all that kind of stuff as well, and just optimize your time as best as you can. Don't waste any time. Number three is don't cheap out on your due diligence period, okay? When you're doing your due diligence, do all the inspections you feel like you need to do. Make sure you cover every little aspect of that property to make sure you know what you're dealing with from top to bottom. Because on a deal of this size, although you may spend $4,000 on inspections, I saved myself 6 figures of a headache. So it's totally worth every penny to spend money on your inspection. And finally, number four, understand that there's a cost to doing business. Unfortunately, we lost about $5,000 on this deal. We didn't have anything to show for it at the end, which it really pains me to say that. But at the same time, I gained a lot from it. I gained experience from it. I made a lot of new connections with people from that. So there was a lot of valuable stuff that came from it that maybe I don't see today. But ultimately, it takes times like this to turn into a successful deal down the road. So understand it's a cost of doing business when you get into the real estate game. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you gained some value from it. And if you did, do me a favor and smash that thumbs up button. And in addition to that, if you haven't already done so, definitely subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell for more videos like this. Also, let me know down in the comments below if you have any questions, and I'll be sure to do my best to get back to you on that. And finally, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at The Out of State Investor. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.